Daf Ayin Tes Summit Base will begin Ayin Tes Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the bottom with the 2 dots. The Mishnah said that if the pile of the straw, if the height was reduced below 10 tefachim, they can no longer take from the straw. So the Gemara is medayek ha'asara shori, but if it is 10 tefachim high, then it's motor. And even though the ceiling is higher, even though there's a space between the top of the pile of the straw and the ceiling, there's a gap, as long as the pile is 10 tefachim high, it's motor. You can infer from here, therefore, that mechitzas that do not reach up to the ceiling still are considered valid mechitzas. Amar Abai says, no, you don't have a riot from here because Hachab Abai is shlit askinan. V'teven asora. Perhaps I'll tell you that if it's 10, the pile of 10 is mutter, it's considered to be mechitza. That's where it's within 3 of the ceiling. The entire height of the ceiling is 13 minus a mashu. Therefore, if the height of the straw is 10, it's within 3 tefachim of the ceiling, and therefore we would say lovid. So, in effect, it does reach the ceiling, even though physically there's a gap, but it's less than 3 tefachim, and therefore we'd say lovid, and it therefore reaches the ceiling. Rav Dirshu Amar, he says, you can even say Avila Tema Bais Asara. You can even say if the house is Asara, if it's 10, the height to the ceiling is only 10. V'teven Shivu Mashu, and the height of the straw is 7 and a little bit. The whole Pax Mishleisha Kalavad Domi, and therefore it's within 3 of the ceiling. Anything less than 3 tefachim would say lovid, so it's considered to be within 3 of the ceiling. Is considered to be reaching the ceiling, that it comes up to the ceiling. So you don't have a raya about mechitza shein megis l'tikra. So bishlam alabai haina diktanim asor. Well, we understand, according to Abai, who says that the height of the ceiling is 13 less a mashu. That's why the Mishnah says that the pile, the stack, is 10. Ella Rav Huna Rav Yeshua Mayasara. Why does it say that the height of the haystack is the pile of the straw is 10? My answer is mitayras asara. It doesn't mean necessarily the physically 10. It means there's a halach of asara. So as long as it's 7 and a mashu, and it's within 3 of the ceiling, it has a tyrus asara. It has a din of asara. That's what he means. Now, if it comes below that, it doesn't have a halach of asara, then it's also. The Mishnah Brura, he says that this din of tikras, that mechitzas and magiyas l'tikra that have come up to the ceiling, he says it applies whether the mechitza is a mechitza which is eina kavu or even kavua, even a permanent mechitza, it has to come up to the ceiling. The Chazon Ish argues on the Mishnah Brura, and he brings a raya from Taisus, that Taisus over here that we have in our sugya, that Taisus says that this requirement is only by this type of mechitza that we're dealing with in our Gemara, which is a mechitza she'ena kavua. But a mechitza kavua, there's no requirement that it comes up to the ceiling. If it's 10 high, it's a valid mechitza. Shnei Masurim, if the height of the haystack was reduced below 10, then the people on either side are also to take from the straw. Shmamina, where it says maybe we can bring a diuk from here that diurim haboim b'shabbos asurin, that even though there were no people here but on the onset of Shabbos, even though they came on Shabbos, they should still asur. Because on the onset of Shabbos, there was a separation over here. There was no access from one side to the other. There was a separation. So there were no diurim from one side to the other side. Now that the height of the haystack has been reduced on Shabbos, you say, well, there's no separation between the two. They merge, so there are new diurim, and they also one on the other. So doesn't that show you that diurim that have come on Shabbos, that arrive on Shabbos, they also it? Because they weren't here on the onset of Shabbos, because there was a separation. Where it says, no, maybe it was reduced, the height was reduced from before Shabbos. Maybe we didn't know about it unknowingly, but they didn't know about it, but there was a reduction in the height, and therefore it answers because the diurim were there on the onset of Shabbos, not during the Shabbos. They didn't come only during the course of the Shabbos. So if this happens and the height of the haystack is reduced, so there's no separation between the two, and they answer on each other, and they would have to make an error, but it's already Shabbos. So what do? So one of the parties locks his house, and he's mavatal rishus to the other party. Tarti, effectively, do you have to do both? Are both required? More says hachi kamer oy noel as beisai oy mavatal rishusai. No, it doesn't mean both. It means either or. The Gemara says, Lo'ilam Tarti, I'll tell you that really you have to do both. Because over here, since he's Dosh, they're accustomed to take from the haystack, and therefore, if you don't do both, then they will follow their normal practice, follow their habit, and continue in taking from the haystack. Therefore, over here, to ensure that we don't, they have to both lock the door, and one of the parties has to be mevatel rishus. There's machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Does this apply by every bittul rishus that you also have to lock any door that has access to it, or is it in the case like this where they're accustomed and they're used to doing it, and it's specifically in the case like this, which we say that it's kevan the dashbe. So Rashi says it applies to all cases. Tosfos says it's unique to our case over here. Who also b'chaver mutter? So the one that is mevatel rishus his friend, he is also to carry, but the other party is mutter. Pshita, frankly more pshita, of course. Well, one who's mevatel rishus, he has no rights. He's relinquished his rights in this chotzer. He's also the other one is mutter. Or says no, he is also the one who's mevatel rishus is also, and he's also and unconditionally and definitely for the entire Shabbos. Even if the other party is mevatel back to him, he will remain also to use this and to carry and to take from it. Even though the other one is mevatel back to him, and it teaches us that he's also, even if the other party is mevatel back to him, it doesn't help, because you cannot be mevatel someone that received the rights from someone who's mevatel to him cannot now relinquish it back to that party. So he remains also. And the same halach applies to a pit filled of straw that's between the two tchumei Shabbos, that one end of it reaches the tchum of one party, which in his alpayim amma, this end, and the other end to the other person on the other side. This side of it is within the tchum of the person on the other side. So the same halacha applies. Each one can take from the side closest to them. Frankly, more pshita. Well, why is this any different than the case of the straw between the chatzeres? Why do we need this further example? Where it says, it's telling you a chiddush, Rabbi Kiva, damet chum deraisa. Even according to Rabbi Kiva, who says chumar deraisa, the same halach will apply. You might have thought to say ligzer, since it's deraisa, that you might say we should be geyser because they might mistakenly take straw from the other side, and since it's deraisa, we should be geyser kamash malan, that each one can take from their own side. Zok the Mishnah, how do you make sheets of mevois? You have to make, if you want to join in a chotzer, you make a ruva chatzeres. If the chatzeres that open up into the movoi want to carry in the movoi, the residents from the chatzeres have to join together in a shituf and put their food together, join together, and place it in a secure area in one of the chatzeres that open into the movoi. So the Mishnah is asking, how can we make the shituf which will avoid having to collect from all of the members and pooling it together? What's a more simple way, a simplified way of making the shituf? So how do we make the shituf in the movoi? Manichas a chavit. One person if he wants to be mezaka for all of the residents, he's meniach as a chavetz. He takes a barrel that has his food in it. And he says that this should be for all the residents of the Mobi. And mezaka lahem, and he can be mezaka them. He can give the rights to them, transfer the rights to all the residents, but he has to do it through a shliach, a mezaka lahem, al yidei b'nai bita gedolim, to his son or daughter who are gedolim, not minors, al yidei avdai v'shivchos ha'ivrim, and even to an eved shivcha who are eved shivcha ivri, al yidei ishta, even to his wife. Now, of course, he can do it to any third party that is a Yisrael, Bardas, and a Gadol, but the Chiddush is it can even do it through these type of people, but conversely, v'lo al yedei b'nai bita k'tanim, but not through his children who are k'tanim. V'lo yedei avdei shivchos ha'k'tanim, and not avadim who k'tanim. So he can't do it al yedei b'nai bita k'tanim, his children who are minors, v'lo yedei avdei k'nanim or k'nanim, mipnei she'ana ki hadai, because they don't have an independent right. Their hand is like his hand, so he hasn't transferred the ownership out of his reshus into a third party. It's considered not leaving, never have left his reshus, and therefore he doesn't confer ownership onto the other residents. What you're using for, and you're being masaka for the residents, it has to be picked up a tefach. Otherwise, it's still considered to be in the reshus of the original owner. So it has to be lifted a tefach. There is a discussion over here amongst the Rishonim. Does this apply? Do we see that, therefore, when we have a kinyan of hagbah, of lifting up, a kinyan of hagbah, does the same din apply? We're saying over here to transfer ownership, to confer it amongst the ownership on the other residents of the Mavoi, it has to be lifted up a tefach. Does that mean hagbah when there's a kinyan? If Reuven sells something to Shimon, and he wants to acquire it, he can acquire the item by hagbah, by lifting it up. Is it also a tefach? Some Rishonim say, we see from here that hagbah is a tefach. Other Rishonim say that no, you can't learn out from here, the way Rashi says that it's a tefach. Over here it's a kula by shituf muvois, which is a requirement in the Rabbanan, but for transferring of ownership through hagbah, through genuine ownership, it has to be 3 tefachim. These two halachas, rather, the Sabi, the elders of Pumbedisa said, one is what we just said about lifting it up at Tefach. Idach, the other halacha they said is, a person makes Kiddush Shabbos, im tom malay lugmav yotza, if he has malay lugmav, his mouthful of the wine is yotza. V'im lav lo yotza, but if he doesn't have a mouthful of the wine, he's not yotza. Tosfos actually says, it doesn't mean both cheekfuls, it means mole one side of the mouth. Not both sides, it's one side of the mouth. They also said the following halacha. You can make a fire for a woman who just gave birth. You can make a fire for her on Shabbos. So it's considered to be a sakonas nefashos, that she gets cold, and therefore it's considered to be pekuch nefashos. You're allowed to make the fire for her, even though it's a malacha. They thought to say that it was davka particular in the case of a woman who gave birth, but not for a sick person. And in the winter when it's cold, but not in the summer. But not in the summer. But Itmar, but the Gemara says no. If a person did bloodletting and he felt cold, even for that type of person who is considered to be a chayla, you can light the fire on Shabbos. And and even with Kufas Tammuz, the middle of the summer when it's hot, but if he feels chilled, then you can do it for him. So it's assumed to be pekuch nefashos. Now, of course, this halacha, this is a generality. If we determine that in a particular case that a person it's a life-threatening situation, then you can light the fire. It's pekuch nefashos Shabbos. And conversely, if we determine, and the doctors determine that it's not life-threatening, you can't. Amar Meimar Hanami Sambe Sabi the Pumbati Samrenu. They said the following halach as well. Itmar Ezuya Sher Stam, where there's tree, and a share is a tree that they were Zor. It's also Bahana. What type of tree can you assume is an Asherah? Amarav Kol Shemeshar Sev the Golum Shem Raisa. A tree that is guarded by the priests, by the priests of the Avodah Zorah. Ve'ein Tomim Parasel, and they don't taste its fruit, so you know that it's their Avodah Zorah. They designate it, and that's why they protect it, they guard it, and don't eat the fruit. Ushul Amar Ki Goin Amre, if they say Hani Tarmal Shechah Devein Nisri. Not only in the case that was mentioned, that you mentioned, that's the way the Meiri learns, not only in your case, but also in this case as well, if they say that the dates from the tree should be used to be set aside for the beer that they'll have in the base of Avodah Zorah of the idol of Nisravi. The Shashla B'Yam Chag, which they drink, the people who arrive at Avodah Zorah, they drink it on their holiday, in their Chag. And Omar Meimer, he said, the halach is like Shmuel. The halach is like Shmuel, that if they say that, that shows that this is an Asherah tree. So we learned earlier, one of the halachas that they mentioned, that for the shituf, it has to be lifted up, the food has to be lifted up at least a tefach. How do you make a shituf in a movoi? You bring a barrel that has wine or dates or dried figs or other fruit. If the food belongs to him, then he has to be mezaka to the other people, and he's mezaka for the other people the food. But if the food belongs to them, he can't do it without the permission. Perhaps they don't want to give the food. Then sorach lohidia, he has to inform them. He has to get permission. Now Rashi says, if it's his, he doesn't have to ask them, because he can be mezaka for them. It's a benefit for them to have the shituf. It's his food, so he doesn't have to ask them. But if you're using their food, you have to ask. And it says, therefore, it says, and it says you only have to lift it up the ground, a mashu. And now previously we learned that it has to be a tefach. The more answers, no, my mashu, namidikoma, tefach, this mashu. When it says mashu, what he means is a tefach. That's his definition of a mashu, but it has to be lifted up, a tefach.